Hi, welcome to video 33, corresponding parts of congruent figures. I'm Ms. Les.
I'm Ms. Bucio.
And we'll be discussing some congruent figures today. So hopefully you guys remember from the past that two figures are congruent if they are exactly the same size and exactly the same shape. So let's take a look at some examples.
All right, we'll start with our first slide here. So we want to write a congruent statement for the congruent figures and their corresponding parts. So for instance here, the way I see it is I see this triangle here, and if I put a line here, it's like a mirror. So this switches over to the other side, right, Ms. Les? So let's see here what we have. Our congruence statement would be A, B, C. Oh, and I missed the important part, would be the triangle. Congruent to J, and that is WR. Sounds good?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll continue, and the way I'm going to set this up, I'm going to do a table. Hopefully that is helpful. So on this side, we're going to have our angles and then our sides. So for our angles, we have angle A is congruent to angle J. Angle B is congruent to angle W, and angle C is congruent to angle R.
Very good.
Awesome. So next one, the sides. So we have AB is congruent to JW. And then we have BC congruent to WR. And then finally we have AC congruent to JR.
Okay, very good. So we have congruent statement and corresponding congruent angles and corresponding congruent sides. Very good. So let's move on. Okay, so for the second example, my first figure, I have two quadrilaterals. So let's write the congruent statement. So there's no special symbol for quadrilateral. So I'm going to name it quadrilateral, the first one. Let me find my pen here. Okay, so the first one, quadrilateral A, B, C, D is congruent to quadrilateral M, N, O, P. Okay? And now I'm going to follow Ms. Yadira's lead and list corresponding congruent angles. So let's try to do the table. So I'll have angles on one side. Okay, so angle A corresponds to and is congruent to angle M. Angle B corresponds to and is congruent to angle N. Angle C corresponds to and is congruent to angle O. And angle D corresponds to and is congruent to angle P. So also, if you notice, the name kind of lists the angles, and it's actually very important, in the same order. So A corresponds to M, B corresponds to N, C corresponds to O, and D corresponds to P. Okay, let's do the sides. So my corresponding congruent side, so side AB is congruent to side MN, side BC is congruent to side NO, side CD is congruent to side DP, and side DA is congruent to PM. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so last one. So let's focus on triangles. So here I have triangle IKE. So if you look in this diagram, there are many different triangles. I have this small triangle on the top and this small triangle right here that are congruent. I have this triangle right here and this triangle right here that are congruent. But I'm going to focus on triangle IE. Okay, so IKE, so that's the one on the left. And then I have ITE, I color. Okay, so let's do a different color. So the second one, ITE. It's hard to go over. Okay, so the first thing, let's write a congruence statement. Okay, so I'm going to write down then my first triangle, triangle IKE is congruent to triangle ITE. Okay, and now again we'll be listing corresponding congruent angles and corresponding congruent sides. So for angles, and sides. Okay, so for my angles, again, because I have more than one angle, if I look at this vertex right here, vertex I, here's this angle and this angle, so I cannot call it angle I. So I have to use 3 letters. So I'm going to call this angle KIM. So angle KIM is congruent to angle TIM. Okay. My second angle, if I'm right here at K, again, I cannot call it angle K because there's more than one angle at that vertex. So I'm going to call it angle IKE is congruent to angle right here at the vertex T, ITE. And the last angle down here, vertex at E, let's call it KEM, is congruent to angle TEM. Okay, and now for my corresponding congruent sides. So my first side, let's use KI, is congruent to side TI. My second side, KE, is congruent to TE. And the third side, if you notice, both triangles are sharing this side right here. So IE is actually congruent to itself. So I have side IE is congruent to side IE. And that's actually one of the properties. It's called reflexive property. So when we get to proofs in the future, we'll be applying that to some of the triangles. Okay, so I think that's our last example. So the only thing left is journal. Okay, so let's take a look at the journal.
So keep in mind to write a congruent statement for the congruent triangles and also write congruent statements for each of their corresponding parts. What helped me the most was writing the table so I can separate the angles and the sides.
Yeah, that was a very good idea. I like that. So maybe organize it. Do the table for corresponding congruent angles and corresponding congruent sides. And the statement of congruency or triangles being congruent, just name the triangles. Watch out for the order that you list them. Remember, the angles have to match. Okay? Good luck.